Jane Austen is overwhelmingly my favourite writer, and has been for very many years. Strangely enough, I came to her in early childhood, and I read her, well, it's one of the earliest books I read, and I've reread many times. In fact, I suppose once a year I reread the whole of Jane Austen, and parts of it I almost know by heart. I think that's true of all her admirers. She very much lives in our imagination the whole time. And I suppose it's because the characters do live so much with us, that we know them so intimately, that there's always a temptation to ask, but what happened next? All the books end with a successful marriage. They're all romantic stories, and they conform, you know, to the sort of basic romance that you have a worthy and attractive young woman who has great difficulties and wins her way through them to, in fact, marry the man of her choice. And I suppose then we want to say, yes, but what went after? Did they have any children? Was everything all right? Was life prosperous to them? Did they settle down? What happened? And many people have sort of, for that reason, have in fact written sequels. And I haven't read those, and I wasn't in the least bit tempted to do anything like that, because as a writer, the creation of my own characters is really so important to me that I really rather dislike the thought of making use of anyone else's work. But my other passion, of course, is writing classical detective story. And I thought it was almost irresistible to try and marry those two together, to examine this marriage, this happy marriage, as we know it was, between Darcy and Elizabeth, and what happened at Pemberley, and to answer some of the questions in the book, which I don't think have been answered, the chief one being the extraordinary change in Darcy's character between his first proposal to Elizabeth and his second successful proposal. To do that, and at the same time see if I could construct a credible detective story with clues and a reasonable solution that the reader should be able to arrive at himself from logical deduction, and all the clues are in the book, and to arrive at the end of the solution to the mystery. Of course, in deciding what sort of crime it should be, there are a great many crimes that it couldn't be because of the age. Couldn't be of sophisticated poisoning. Lots of things could be electrocution and so forth and so on. I think it had to be something that could happen in a rural setting. And I wanted the setting to be, as it were, mysterious, to be a contrast to the order and the peace and the civilization which Pemberley represents. In the book, Pemberley does represent civilization of its age. And outside there are two woods, one which is the formal woodland, which has been planted really, or planted in accordance with the plan of a very notable landscape gardener, and then the wild woodland, which is left wild at the back of the house, the northwest of the house. And there's an entry through that to the servants' quarters of the house and to the stables. And that does represent something dark and mysterious. And there is a tragedy which occurred there, which I won't describe now, but it's in the book, which really means that people do not visit it after dark, and they regard it as haunted. So there is that huge contrast between the two places, which are so close together. You look out of the windows and you see this dark shadow of the woodlands in the distance. And it seemed to me that I wanted the death to take place then, there, in that place. Well, I suppose the challenge was to try and be true to the kind of style in which Jane Austen herself wrote. And that seems very presumptuous, because this is Jane Austen's style, it's unique. It was really, I think, new at the time. And am I just trying to copy it? Not really. I'm just trying to somehow have an echo of her voice, really, in telling the story. And undoubtedly, I think that people will be able to find anomalies and say she wouldn't have used this word or she wouldn't have used that word. And this is rather different because, in a sense, it is a modern writer writing and using the words a modern writer would use. But I've tried as far as possible to avoid that, and tried to make particularly the dialogue really sound like the dialogue of the time, much more formal than ours would be. The relationship between people, between husband and wife. the way Mr. and Mrs. Bennet would refer to each other as Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Bennet, and the very rare use of Christian names between even husband and wife, or of endearment, and certainly there would be, I think, no demonstrations of love as there are in our sort of more, I suppose, open society. I don't know. It was a formal age as far as manners were concerned and speech was concerned.